Hi, my name is Ilan Rubin from the New Regime, and I'm here to talk about some of my favorite drummers. Obviously, Stewart Copeland is a very popular drummer, and I'd have to say what really sets him apart from others is how sort of spread out and sporadic his tastes are, and really I mean this in a complimentary way, how kind of ADD he is with his parts, whether it be what he does on the bell, what he does on the hi-hats, or with his octobans, his four toms, whatever. He had a pretty expansive setup, and he definitely used it to its full potential. But some songs in particular that come to mind when I think of Stewart Copeland are Murder by Numbers on Synchronicity. That one's great. Kind of has a polyrhythm throughout the whole thing, which is very nice. My favorite, if I had to sum up Stewart Copeland's favorite playing, to me would actually be the second disc of The Police Live. It was done during the Synchronicity tour, and I think that really has the majority of the Stewart Copeland tricks, but in a very concise manner, laid out through about 14 or so songs. So that's probably the most I've learned from, but is very subtle hi-hat tricks, like in Don't Stand So Close to Me. Not necessarily in a busy way, but how dynamic he was in the way he played. Instead of just keeping straight eighth notes, he'd really accent some sort of things, but do it in a very sporadic way. He didn't really pick a pattern and run with it. He'd just run with whatever was coming to mind, it seems like to me anyway. I really like his drumming on Driven to Tears. That's a great one. And going along with that album, I'd say When the World is Running Down, that's a really good one. He's got a kind of funkiness to him. One other thing I'm going to talk about when it comes to Stewart Copeland, he had a very unique use of echo, and I'm not sure if people really dig into that very deeply, but on the first song on Regatta de Blanc, I actually think it's called Regatta de Blanc, he's kind of playing off of himself with the delay, with an echo, and you hear it more so live on songs like Walking on the Moon. Even on the Walking on the Moon track on the actual album, that very famous middle part where he's kind of doing triplets but letting the echo do most of the work and then really making it busy. Very interesting use of an echo. Another one of my favorite drummers would have to be Joe Morello, and I know that may seem slightly odd of me, or actually not odd. He was a fantastic drummer, and really what I enjoy about him is how incredibly smooth he was when he played and very dynamic. Now, I'm not one who listens to a lot of music that is done in very odd time signatures, but the Dave Brubeck Quartet was obviously very, very good at that, especially playing in 5/4. So my favorite recording with Joe Morello on it would be Dave Brubeck live at Carnegie Hall. Fantastic drumming, and the actual quality of it sounds great. And like I said, I actually think he was a big influence on Bonham. They had a very similar feel. You could tell that Bonham, I think, kind of the way he would start his solos, he kind of borrowed from that type of drummer that era. Could have been Morello himself, but also the sextuplet feel with fills around the drum set. But just a very smooth drummer while doing very intricate things and had incredible dynamics. He was a very fast drummer as well, and really displayed that at very key moments that really kind of surprised you in a way. And I should also say that I really like the way Joe Morello played, because I'm not a very big jazz guy at the moment or into big band drummers, but watching him play really introduced me to the world of Buddy Rich and Louis Bellson and people like that. So out of those, I'd really have to say that overall Joe Morello would be my favorite of that sort of era of drummer. Now, if any of you might know me, probably not, John Bonham is my absolute favorite drummer of all time. I've been thoroughly obsessed with him since I was about 7, 8 years old, thanks to my dad introducing me to Led Zeppelin 1 when I first picked up the drums. But I really could go on about Bonham for a lifetime, so let me just start with, I don't even know where to go. There's too much to talk about, One thing that people may not take into consideration when thinking about Bonham is he really had a unique sound to his drums. He played large drums that were tuned fairly high, but he really has that a very signature sound, almost like you can tell Brian May's guitar instantly. You can tell the way Bonham tuned his drums and really pick that out. So, for example, I got a bootleg, and you listen to bootlegs, you're like, is this real? What is this? Second I heard him kind of hit his snare and do his like brr, brr, around the drum set, I knew that was Bonham. And really, you can pick anything he's done out just by listening. So, some key Bonham tracks, I think that would be a good place to start. Some of my favorites are The Crunch off House of the Holy, love it. House of the Holy is actually my favorite Led Zeppelin album. I could go on about that for days. But that's really an interesting beat. Odd time signature, but it happens to roll and flow extremely well, and a very interesting choice of where to open and close the hi-hat. Love that. Obviously Fool in the Rain, that's been talked about since I'd say probably about 1978. And obviously it's an incredible feel. Another one of those things where it just kind of keeps rolling, and it actually is a little more difficult than it sounds. He makes it sound very easy, but really getting that feel, have to work at it a little bit. Poor Tom, that's an odd one that I've never heard anyone talk about. It's on Coda. Very fantastic but simple beat that really takes place between snare and hi-hat and has that offbeat hi-hat. Sorry, what was I saying? Takes place on the snare drum and bass drum, but the offbeat hi-hat kind of adds a unique Bonham-esque texture. Bonham was great at always keeping the hi-hat playing when he'd go to the ride cymbal or stay on the drums, and that's something that I definitely do at all times. If I'm not keeping time with the hi-hat while I'm doing something else, I don't feel quite right. More up-tempo Bonham, like Song Remains the Same or Achilles' Last Stand. He had that great sort of galloping feel when he'd play up-tempo. And of course, his setup in itself has rubbed off on me. 26, 14, 60, 18, I have a slightly deeper bass drum than he did, but really love the way his drum sounded, like I said, and of course I use larger cymbals just like him, maybe a little bit bigger, but the 24-inch ride is something that I took from Bonham and will never downsize, ever. It's fantastic. You can be just as dynamic with large drums as you can small drums, except large drums have the option of getting louder and deeper. Fantastic. Now, when we're talking specifically about the fourth Led Zeppelin album, obviously what comes to mind is the fantastic drum sound on When the Levee Breaks. Now, whether you attribute that to the engineer, I believe Andy Johns was the engineer, or Bonham himself, the feel playing off the echo, beautiful, just nice and spacious, yet it's incredibly entertaining to listen to. Misty Mountain Hop, I love that feel, and I kind of really use the feel of that song as the backbone for a song of mine called All Laid Out to Rest. It's not really slow, not really up-tempo, but it's kind of driving, so in the tempo range of Dancing Days or Misty Mountain Hop. Great. What else can we talk to? I mean, I'd say a signature John Bonham fill could be found in Black Dog. I'd say a couple minutes into it, the ba-ba-da-dum, great, fantastic. Obviously another fill that he's used a couple times and live all over the place could be found, I'd say about 5-6 minutes into Stairway to Heaven. Fantastic, so good, one of my favorites. Four sticks. Playing in 5/4. He actually used 4 sticks, 1 pair in each hand. That's why it's called 4 sticks. You might be able to tell that I'm an extreme Led Zeppelin fan. Some might say fanatic. I wouldn't disagree.